So this morning I was on Facebook, and Gary Logan had a post, and he said, "Please try to point out the great work of Outreach International in abolishing poverty and alleviating suffering, and put a little something extra in the plate." And if you know Gary, he's been a runner, and sometimes he runs more than others, but he has a blog where he raises money for outreach and he discusses his running, and you can go to that. It's runforlove.org, and you can donate money. And I thought it was appropriate to think about the work of outreach in reaching out into communities when we're discussing the scripture today of the 2 fish and the 5 loaves of bread. When Gabe was in middle school, he was on a Destination Imagination team. Are you guys familiar with what that is? I see a few heads nodding. These are teams where they're tested to think on their feet, and they're required to work together and devise original solutions that satisfy the requirements of the challenges. The participants gain more than just basic knowledge and skills. They learn to unleash their imaginations and take unique approaches to problem solving. A statistically significant amount of the Destination Imagination students report that they benefit through improvements in their critical thinking, problem solving, and teamwork. And these skills raise their self-confidence and better their lives in the long term. One of the skills that the students are taught is called yes and. Is anybody familiar with that? Yes and? Kay raises her hand. Gabe, are you familiar with yes and? It's an important skill that they teach the students so they learn to think bigger together than they can alone. One rule that they follow is you never deny your fellow teammate. So if somebody brings up something, you don't say, "Oh, that won't work." Instead, you say yes and you add your idea to it, so that you're willing to accept ideas and then add on those ideas. So here's how it works. Can I have a couple people that might want to help me demonstrate how yes and works? Kay, Brandon, and Jelly, come on up. So, yes and. You just have to remember that part. I have a Frisbee.
Yes, and you can make it work.
And you can make it go high.
And you can share.
Yes and it's also a plate.
That could help somebody with their meal.
And you can pass it along to many other people.
Yes, and it's a Frisbee.
It's also a hat to protect me from the sun.
I'm running out. Yes, and it's green.
And it's a rather stylish hat. It'll stay on.
Yes, and it's from Kansas City Art Institute.
Yes and it's a fan. So you can kind of see how yes and works. And if we had more time, yes and. Today, as we look at the gospel, I'm going to ask that we use yes and thinking, so that we might be able to think bigger together than we could alone. Today's lectionary reading gives us 2 stories, which is kind of a curious thing. We first hear the story of a hillside full of people who came to hear Jesus, and then a story of walking on water. Both of these stories are very familiar to us. But I just want to give us a little bit of background. John, in his gospel, is not worried about chronological accuracy of his stories, but he really wants to share with his community who Jesus is. John is establishing the Christology for the community. You may not be familiar with that word Christology. It's a Greek comes from two words, Christos and Loga, meaning Christ or Messiah, and Word, and you combine them together, that's the study of Christ. The primary consideration when you're doing Christology is you're looking at the relationship of Jesus, the nature of his person, and the nature of God. Christology is concerned about the details of Jesus' ministry, his acts, his teaching. So John was really about establishing that Christology for his communion, in his community. In John's gospel, you don't find any of the parables. He tells stories instead, and it's more miracle-focused. This is who Jesus is for John and his community. Community of Christ has a statement on Christology, and it's actually included inside your bulletin, and you can find it out on the website, so you can see it in there. Our belief in the living Christ is really core to our identity. My personal belief is that it's important that we examine and understand what our Christology is. And the reason is because that's how we live out our faith. That's how we work in the world. That's how we decide how we worship. I believe how we see Jesus informs and shapes us, and it also shows us how we see others. John was helping his community establish their Christology. Here's a few highlights from John's Gospel. Jesus starts his ministry at the wedding in Cana, turning water into wine. It's the first miracle that's recorded, and actually his mother comes to him and tells him, "Hey, Jesus, they're out of wine." And he kind of comes back and says, "Woman, what do you expect me to do?" But we know, in the story, the water is changed to wine, and there's an abundance, and the guests have a nice party. And there's another story about Nicodemus, who comes sneaking in at night to see Jesus. He does this because he's a Pharisee. He's a member of the Sanhedrin, and they are on the outs with Jesus, so he doesn't really want anybody to know. So he comes in at night and talks with Jesus. And you could read a little bit more about that story. Another example is Jesus goes to the well, and it's at midday, and he speaks to a woman there who's been discarded by society, and he asks her for a drink, and they have a conversation. Another interesting story. It's interesting in regards to not just these stories, but the gospel stories. Often the disciples don't get it. It's the same with both Nicodemus and the woman at the well. They just don't get it. Nicodemus is confused about being reborn, and the woman is confused about the living water. I wonder if we do the same thing sometimes, trying to fit everything into a literal meaning. Could it be that we just don't get it too? Could it be that we don't comprehend? Could it be that sometimes we're a little confused? Before I read the lectionary scripture, I want to set the scene. There are 5,000 men who were gathered to hear Jesus, which was really incredible when you think about it. Many biblical scholars tell us that the crowd would have been much, much bigger because they were only counting the men. So, when you count the women and children, that crowd could have been as big as 10,000, 15,000, maybe 20,000 people. And Jesus went on speaking to this crowd for hours. It's amazing. Think about it. No microphone, no PowerPoint, no notes. The hours slipped away, and as the crowd, they listened to Jesus. Now they're hungry. Maybe they're a little cranky too. In Mark and Luke, the disciples asked Jesus, "Should we just send them away?" And Jesus asked, "Well, what do we have?" We all know this story, but here, let's read it from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. It's really nice to have Jelly kind of set that up for us this morning in the children's ministry so you can kind of understand what was going on here, how they actually follow him. He's trying to get away and they just want to be near him. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, 5,000, would you consider that a large crowd coming towards you? Just a bit, huh? Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said that to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told the disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. They filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea to come near to the boat. And they were terrified, but he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." They then wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land towards which they were going. I'm going to ask, does anybody have a Kleenex? My allergies are, I'm sensing a sneeze coming on. So, thank you. The story of the feeding of the 5,000 is found in all 4 Gospels. But John puts in some very interesting details. Of course, Jesus and his disciples brainstorm a way to offer good hospitality to the crowd. They formulate a plan on how to feed the masses. No, wait, that's not quite how it goes. The disciples, particularly Philip, are clear there's absolutely, positively nothing that they can do to conceivably feed these people. In John's telling of the story, it's a child who brings 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread. Think about it. Someone who wasn't even counted in the 5,000 brings forth the stuff to do the miracle. It's God saying, yes, and. This really isn't unusual for God to use the one who isn't counted. Abraham was too old, Moses stuttered, Jacob was a liar. Several weeks ago, Dave, in his service, talked about David, who wasn't even considered leadership material. The prophet Amos, his only training was in pruning fig trees. Jesus was poor, born in a lowly stable, someone who instructed his disciples to travel light. Yes, and God uses people that the culture tells us they don't count. God can always use something that is not counted. We too must be aware of those who don't seem to count. Or from a very popular TV show, as the doctor says, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before. We must acknowledge that everyone has something to bring to the community. At this point, point in the gospel story, Jesus takes the bread and the fishes and blesses it. 2 fishes, 5 loaves. He blesses. Yes, and do we get it? He's blessing something that isn't enough. Can we be thankful for something that isn't enough? Can we lift up that which isn't enough and be thankful we find ourselves in that circumstance when we're in a place that we haven't planned? Jesus takes the bread and the fish and blesses it. Then what? He breaks it. Blessed and broken. We all know what it means to be broken. Brokenness is often accompanied by emptiness. A few weeks ago in our service together, we shared our fears and our brokenness. It's not an easy thing to do, to admit when we feel broken. It's not easy to admit when life isn't turning out as planned. When our jobs, our families, our finances, our relationships, and even our bodies don't seem to be cooperating. When we feel tired and broken. I don't take joy in breaking. I don't pray to the Lord that I might break so that I can bring blessings to others. I don't say, "Here I am, Lord, broken, use me." In a time when we hear so much talk about prosperity, about God desiring happiness, the message of brokenness just doesn't appeal to anyone. And yet I look around and I see evidence that it is in the breaking of life that blessing comes forth. The prophet Jeremiah struggled with this very same thing. From the 18th chapter of Jeremiah, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. "Come, go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words." So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at the wheel. The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, as seemed good to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me, "Can I not do with you just as the potter has done?" In Henry Nouwen's book, The Wounded Healer, he asked the question, how can wounds become a source of healing? This is a question that requires careful consideration. Making our brokenness a source of healing is to be aware of the human condition. Nouwen says, when we become aware that we do not have to escape our pains, but that we can mobilize them into a common search for life, those very pains are transformed from expressions of despair into signs of hope. So back to the gospel story. What's next? The food is passed out and they eat till they're satisfied. 2,000 years removed from this event, the words can still make us stop. In a world of hunger, how can all be satisfied? It is not just that they were satisfied, but there were leftovers. And then Jesus has them gather up the scraps. They had 12 baskets full of leftovers. John's details are very interesting as we look at those 12 baskets. Baskets full of scraps, one for each of the disciples. You can read other commentaries and they say the 12 baskets might represent the 12 tribes of Israel. But I like to think that Jesus was equipping the disciples out of the scraps. Think about those scraps. And it is God saying, yes, and it is me who counted you when other people didn't. And it is me who counts you now. But what happens next? It'd be nice just to leave the story kind of there, wouldn't it? But the crowd, they turn and they try to force Jesus to become king. So he draws away to be by himself on the mountain. He goes there to pray. And apparently he must have been there for a long time because the weather changes, it gets dark. The disciples, they get in a boat, they head out across the Sea of Galilee towards Capernaum. How many people have been on a boat at night out in the water? A few. So let's say you don't have any lights out there in the boat at night on the water. What's that like? Very dark. Very dark. Have you ever been in a boat at night on the water and the wind's blowing? It is scary. It is scary. And of course they didn't have life jackets either, right? So they're huddled together, the wind's blowing. John tells us that they were 3 or 4 miles out on the lake. They're huddled together in the middle of the storm. The dead of night is all around them. And there they see Jesus walking on the water towards them. You'd think this might be comforting to them, but it wasn't. They were frightened, but he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." It's tough in the midst of our storms, in the times of our brokenness, to hear these words. But let these words dwell richly among us. It is I, do not be afraid. What links these two stories together is that Jesus does something totally unexpected, and it changes the lives of those around him forever. Jesus is constantly doing what no one expects, but the results are the same time and time again. They're stories told about a yes and God. Yes, and I will be there for you in unexpected ways. What are crowds looking for today? What are we looking for today? When we see crowds at malls or sporting events or concert halls or rallies or parades, amusement parks or athletic centers, what hunger are they seeking to fill? What is the difference between abundance and excess? Perhaps these readings have something to teach us about fear too, and fear is certainly the driving force underneath scarcity thinking. Fear measures the scarcity carefully and says that there is never enough, and certainly never enough for everyone. Fear makes us feel like we're sinking in debt, sinking in despair, sinking in depression and addiction and loss. Fear makes us grab onto the wrong things to protect us and even save us, to pull us out of the stormy seas. Fear makes us arm ourselves to the teeth and then miss the hand that is held out to us, telling us to fear not, but to recognize that God is God. These stories have illustrated for us how life might be in God's yes and kingdom. In God's kingdom, there will be someone who will bless the community with their generosity, even when they aren't counted. Yes, and in God's kingdom, there's enough food for all. Yes, and in God's kingdom, fear is calmed. We see Jesus' action touch the most basic human needs. People's hunger and fears are relieved. We are called to faithfully follow Christ's example. The details of the story gives us some clues on how we might understand our role in addressing hunger and poverty. The question for us is, what do we have? How might God use what we have to multiply it to help others? Do you hear the invitation? God calls to us in our present day situations to be co-creators, offering our generosity, asking us to add our yes and. This is the essence of our mission initiative to alleviate poverty and suffering. This mission cannot happen by us just repeating the words and shaking our heads in agreement. It requires wise planning. It requires us to, in effect, work with God to bring about God's longing for justice and peace, God's longing for right relationships and mutual well-being in the midst of inadequate and unfair social systems and structures, in the hope of personal and communal abundance of life. So then let's look at John's teaching in the life of our congregation. Do we have expectations for our shared life? Do we seek to be transformed? What hope do we have? Do we see shortage and scarcity or generosity and abundance? Do we worry about whether we're being true to the gospel, speaking courageously and acting boldly on the behalf of those who suffer? I often admit I feel myself acting like the disciples, overwhelmed by what's in front of me. I find I assess every situation. I measure my resources and try to figure out a solution. But often I feel powerless in the face of so much needing to change. I forget to hear the yes and of Jesus calling to us today. If we could hear it, what else would we do? We are challenged to see how we can relate to those in need. While one may take the issue with the mechanics of programs intended to alleviate poverty, the followers of Christ must accept the sacrifices they are called to make for the greater good, difficult though it may be. Here are God's words to us from Doctrine and Covenants 163:4. God, the eternal creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, mistreated, and diseased of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. Such conditions are not God's will. Open your ears to hear the pleadings of mothers and fathers in all nations who desperately seek a future of hope for their children. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides your welfare. The earth, lovingly created as an environment for life to flourish, shudders in distress because creation's natural living systems are becoming exhausted from carrying the burden of human greed and conflict. Humankind must awaken from its illusion of independence and unstrained consumption without lasting consequences. Let the educational and community development endeavors of the church equip people of all ages to carry the ethics of Christ's peace into all arenas of life. Prepare new generations of disciples to bring fresh vision to bear on the perplexing problems of poverty, disease, war, and environmental deterioration. Their contributions will be multiplied if their hearts are focused on God's will for creation. You hear that? Their contributions will be multiplied. That's something God has a way of doing. We must be prepared to minister to the poor and hungry wherever God calls us to minister to them. Jesus so identified with the poor that he takes our treatment of them as treatment of him. If we are to call ourselves true followers of Christ, then we must act on the ethical teachings, including the teachings related to feeding the hungry. Our family has tried to implement a new tradition to bring in the new year. We put together manna bags. Who knows? Does anybody know what those are? The manna bags, a few people. So we put together manna bags. It's a bag. It has usually maybe stuff to make a meal or two in it. It's got some food. We put in toothbrush and toothpaste and socks and just a few things that fits in a gallon-sized bag. We take those downtown in Denver on January 1st, and we pass those out. We're always met with a lot of thank yous, but I will forever remember the response of one man as he looked at the bag, and he was overcome with emotion, and he said, "Socks, socks, thank you for the socks." There's a 5-stage process that moves someone from being a mere observer to an active participant. We must first notice that something's wrong. Second, we must realize that people need help. Third, we must take responsibility to help them. 4, we must choose a form of helping. And 5, we must implement the help. The possibilities to serve the least of these are limitless. There are so many people who need our help. All we have to do is keep our eyes open to see those opportunities where we can help people and keep our hearts open to respond. The more we share God's comfort with others, the more it will come forth from our own hearts. In every life, a choice must be made in which we decide the principles that will guide us in our relationships, our neighborhoods, our communities, our work and play. We can choose to allow our own self-interest to be primary, or we can trust and follow the ways of God's reign, truly to do what will lead to life. The challenge is that we would love to believe that following Jesus guarantees prosperity, health, and safety. But this is not what the weekly reading promised us. Rather, it offered a vision of God's grace and the presence that calls to grace, that compassion, blessing to the whole creation. Do not be afraid to beckon. Do not be afraid to go where it beckons you to go. Yes, and we will go. We may see generosity that leads to abundance, brokenness that leads to healing, and fear that leads to courage. I'm going to play a song for you now, and I hope that this song, you'll carry it forth like a blessing for you throughout the week. It is Adele's Make You Feel My Love.